Listen, anytime you get to bring up Doug Johnson talking about the starting quarterbacks and Kyle Trask down in Florida, I think it's going to be a good
Yeah, let me dive right into that because this is pretty provocative stuff from the former Florida quarterback here. It's item number 1 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And don't worry, we'll get to all the other SEC teams here in a moment. But let me start with Florida here because Doug Johnson goes on the Florida podcast from SEC Country to sort of talk about the Gators with Jeff Cardozo and Zach Alberverdi, and they're asking about the quarterback situation. And, you know, Johnson, who knows that position well, knows that program well, understands how much Gators fans want to see quality quarterback play. But when Johnson evaluates what he saw from the Florida quarterbacks this spring, he comes away with a pretty clear takeaway. And the way that Doug describes this, it makes it fairly difficult to dispute. Here is Doug Johnson weighing in on the situation between Feleipe Franks, the incumbent starter, and Kyle Trask, the guy who seems to be competing here, nipping at the heels of Franks. Here is Doug Johnson on that subject.
My humble opinion is if you have a guy that played all year or played majority of the snaps in a situation or in a competitive situation in the following spring with other guys that never saw the field, so the experience factor is working against them, and you take those guys and compare it to the guy who played majority of the snaps, and you don't have a clear-cut winner, that tells me that it's 100% open competition, number one. And number two, I would not be surprised if Trask gets the nod.
So there are two thoughts for me on this. Thought number one is, the way that Johnson lays that out, as I said before, it's a little bit hard to argue with it. If you've got one guy who's got the experience, we think of experience as a little bit of a negating factor, the kind of thing that sort of, if all things being equal, the guy with experience ought to play better. If the experience isn't used in this case to be better, then maybe Feleipe Franks just isn't better than Kyle Trask.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it comes down to. And if that's all we knew about this situation, Mike, for me, that argument would win the day, except for this. Florida went through this same thing last year where they said, we're tired of Luke Del Rio. We want Feleipe Franks.
Yeah.
And then before Del Rio got hurt, they're rushing him back out on the field because he really was the best guy after all. So I want to lean in the direction of Doug Johnson and say he's right about the Florida quarterback situation. But another former Gators quarterback could have said the same thing a year ago about Franks replacing Luke Del Rio because Florida fans were tired of him this time last year. What do you think?
I think that this argument would have come up more last year had Kyle Trask not been hurt, right? He gets the foot injury, some kind of heel injury right before the season, so he's not going to play most of the year anyways, right? He's not going to play. He's hurt. He's on the sideline. His name would have been brought up more often to me last year had he been able to play. I think you'd have seen a guy like Kyle Trask getting an opportunity to get on the field. I tend to agree with Doug Johnson in a way where I look at it and say, you know what? This isn't even close to being the same offensive system. Think of all the weapons that are now back that you did not have on offense last year. You didn't have an number one wide receiver. Your offensive line wasn't very good. Jordan Scarlett was not in the backfield. Now all of a sudden you're given all these new weapons. Why can't Kyle Trask do well in this role? Why can't Kyle Trask come in and you say, well, he wasn't a starter in high school. You know, he's never been a starter. He can make all the throws. And I saw the arm strength out of him. I saw him commanding the huddle in that spring game. So I still lean and say, to me, it's an even competition. Feleipe Franks has passed, and last year does nothing for me, if not just make things negative.
If Kyle Trask was good enough to play, he'd be playing somewhere. I mean, he just would.
It'll be in Florida, though. I think it's – I'm telling you, I know that you sleep on Kyle Trask, but I'm just telling you. I don't look at him and say, boy, if they have to stop Kyle Trask, it's going to be a long year. Guy's got a lot of arm strength. He's got a little bit of mobility. He can move around the pocket. And I think that he played well.
But you're saying that I'm sleeping on Kyle Trask. What I actually think is everybody else in the universe is doing the exact opposite. They assume because he puts that orange helmet on, all of a sudden he's an SEC quarterback. Listen, just because you're in that role doesn't mean you are that guy. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to take all the lumps from the Florida fans like hardwired to self-destruction who says he can't wait to see the look on my face when Florida goes out there and plays well behind Kyle Trask this season.
Dinking and dunking.
Yeah, listen, I'll be the first one to say everything that everybody wants to hear me say. But for now, I'm going to assume that a guy that couldn't start for his high school team shouldn't start for Florida.
Well, listen, here's how I tend to feel about this. This to me, and I love the guy to death. He was a good teammate of mine. This to me is a Greg McElroy situation. Greg McElroy started 1 year in high school. He was behind Chase Daniels for 3 years at South Lake Carroll. Nobody really knew what to think of him. He was supposed to go to Texas Tech. He ends up at Alabama, starts 2 years for Alabama, wins a ton of games. Now, was Greg McElroy ceiling through the roof? Was his athletic ability off the charts? Absolutely not. But given all the right pieces put around him, he won a lot of football games. I see Kyle Trask in a lot of that same role.